Hello and welcome back to MFA Writers. We're now in late October, which means if you're a listener who's planning to apply to MFA programs this year, now's the time to start putting together those applications so they're ready for the first deadlines in December. I wanted to remind you all today that we have several application-centric episodes available that can help with this process, including episodes with application gurus Katie Vishniak and Jess Silfa, and episodes from faculty members' perspectives with Ron Shavers, Lindsay Bernal, and Gregory Spatz. I hope you check them all out and find them helpful during the application process. Wishing you all the best of luck. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Henneh Kyereh Kwaku, winner of Poetry Magazine's J. Howard and Barbara M.J. Wood Prize. Henneh was born in Goneswa, raised in Drobo in the Bono region of Ghana, and recently received his MFA from Chapman University. He has received fellowships from the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora, Chapman University, and the Carolyn Moore Writing Residency. He's the author of the poetry chapbook Revolution of the Scavengers and the founder and host of Church of Poetry. His poems and essays have appeared or are forthcoming in the Academy of American Poets A Poem a Day, Poetry Magazine, Prairie Schooner, World Literature Today, and many other places. Today, Henneh has brought 3 poems to read for us.
Thank you. I'm reading In Praise of Mary Anna Seri, who happens to be my mother. February, and the harmattan reappears, whitening your knuckles. For the 3rd time this day, you sweep the compound. Dawn, before your thoughts are mixed with that of the kindergartners. Afternoon, when you return to make supper, in wait of a husband, a beloved father, almost the last to be home from work. No, I say this again. Let the neem's leaves yellow the compound. For once, be oblivious to those who are oblivious to your prayers, that keep your children alive and eating. You, sweet country of mine, the world is a beard, fire looming, where is your water? And the next poem I'm reading is a short note on writing a joyful poem. Only yesterday, I too pricked my middle finger in making way for love. With water and spittle made a hex. The Ghanaian flag once above my bed, now bleeding on my desk. Some have said the colors are changing. The gold is a curse to our waters. And Atua is dying, so China can find its bauxite. It is as if everyone who ever came here was in search of their missing treasures. Many have crossed deserts, some were buried in dunes, others dehumanized, taken in cages. Until your foolishness, Mr. President, I loved you. You've blamed Russia, Ukraine, the pandemic, everybody else but you and your theft, and your government of your people. Daughters, nieces, uncles, nephews, cousins, in-laws, brothers, sisters, and friends. Now you call on us to hunger and pray, to encourage a currency you've strangled, to breathe again. Why not losing your grip? I assure you, My delight today is in this roasted chicken and the coffee cake on my desk. The I love yous of my friends and are you okays of my family. The purple and yellow sticky note of chocolates for the heart, of course. And this is my all-time favorite tea. And I'll read one more poem called Ghana. He pointed a rifle at the throat of Eric Ofosu. He shot without hesitation. Eyewitness on the murdering of Eric Ofosu. I want to get a pet one day, a cat, maybe, or a dog, and name it after my country. So each poem I write for it is also for my country. I want a messy pet, a beautiful pet, a pet that's a metaphor for my country. That when I say my pet tore my life apart today, I also mean my country tore my life apart. When I say my pet is beautiful, I also am saying my country is beautiful. When it steals my fish, I say what I say. When it brings me fish, I know there is a bargain, something ticking, something I won't know of. When it breaks my heart, I know it is my country and I cannot unlove it. When it kills me, I won't know. Thank you.
Henneh, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for reading those for us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation, and it's an honor to be here.
Well, one thing that readers will notice when they read your poetry and listeners could hear today, like listening to these poems, is that you often bring up your home country of Ghana. It's very present in your poetry. So clearly your home has had a big influence on you and is a major inspiration for your poetry. So I wanted to start there and just hear you talk about your home a little bit, what it was like growing up there, and also what it was like to leave.
Ooh. I'm not even sure where to start from, whether to start from the living or to how about growing up. I think Ghana is a beautiful place and very friendly people. And we have a running joke that we are so friendly that in school, in basic school, you actually taught that Ghanaians are friendly and hospitable. And so that's how friendly Ghanaians are. That, like, we actually teach in school that Ghanaians are friendly and hospitable. So, yeah, I grew up in Drobo, which is a few kilometers away from my hometown, Gunasia, and Drobo happens to be currently the municipal capital of the German district. I mean, now it's a German municipality of Ghana. And I think it's a beautiful place and very quiet, very peaceful, and friendly, as I've already mentioned, like very friendly people. And it's one of those places where everybody, to some extent, knows everybody. And so you go somewhere else, you meet somebody, and then they know your parents, they know your family, that kind of thing. So, but I really loved my time in Drobo. But I think for people who have also read my chapbook, they also see another place called Hohoi, which it happens to be in the Volta region. And I think for me, it has become my secondary hometown because that's where I did my undergrad. And so I lived in the Volta region. I lived in Hohoi specifically for 5 years. And I think it changed so much in me and even about my writing.
How so? Like, what comes to mind when you think about how you changed after moving there?
So I think the Volta region, it's a different ethnicity from mine. They speak a different language. Right. But I went there and I loved the people. Up to now, most of my friends that I still maintain from undergrad are actually people from the Volta region. I mean, even some of the friends that I have that I didn't meet in undergrad now are still from the Volta region. And it's become like a foundation in my life. Of course, Drobo played a significant role, Drobo, Gunasia, the Bono region, but I think Volta region was the place where I started building who I am today. And so I hold it like, very close to my heart.
Well, now you're living in the US and you have been for a while. I lived abroad for almost a decade, and I found that having that space between me and my home really caused my home to come up more in my writing than it had before. I found myself writing about my home more because there was this space between me and my home. And I'm curious if you've seen that space affecting your writing.
I would say yes and no. The reason I say yes and no is because, like, even while I lived in Ghana, my work was still very much about Ghana. And so it feels like I'm just continuing that kind of tradition where I'm still, it is the same thing that I used to do. But, the only thing that changes now is I live in the US. And so there is a different perspective. Now I'm looking inside Ghana from outside, if that makes sense. And so that changes a few things. But I think one of the things that have been very clear since being here is also the fact that I feel to some extent that I'm in some kind of a limbo. I mean, an in between space where it feels like I don't belong to any of the spaces right now. I I spoke to a friend a couple of days ago, and I was explaining that one of the things that makes this even very clear is that as a grad student, I'm trying to apply for some grants, and then it happens that a lot of the U.S. grants, because I'm an international student, I am not qualified, and some grants that I'll find in Ghana or even Africa-centered grants require that you live in Africa, which means that now I cannot apply for grants in the US and I cannot apply for grants in Ghana or in Africa in general. So I think it's one of the things that, it's very clear for me that, oh yeah, you are no longer here and you're no longer there. But the other part is also like, my family still lives in Ghana. My friends are in Ghana. Some of my closest friends, live in Ghana. And so it has its own challenges because I'm always confronting the time zones.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I remember doing that dance when I lived abroad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always like at that space where, trying to figure out, oh, what time is it like in Ghana right now? So I'm always shouting and asking Siri, like, what is the time in Accra, Ghana right now? Oh, yeah. So those are some of the things that I'm confronted with. But also, of course, the part where you're always missing that place, the spaces that you used to go to. I think some of my friends texted me. We have this friend group, and they texted me that they want to meet together this Christmas, and I'm like, okay, this sounds like you guys are throwing like dust into my eyes, but okay, and I mean, of course, I might be there virtually, but it doesn't feel the same way.
So when you sit down to write, do you feel like, I don't know, do you feel more present in Ghana? Do you feel closer to Ghana when you're working on the page?
I think the best way I can phrase this is that, like, I still feel like I'm in between the two spaces. And so, like, my work currently, a lot of the work that I've done actually is, looking at those places at the same time. And I had a Nigerian friend here, Socrates, and I used to tell him that when I walk some places in Orange, California, I feel like I'm in Hohoi in the Volta region of Ghana. Even the architecture is different, but for some reason, I just feel like I'm in Ghana or I'm in the Volta region. And I remember, at least for the very first like 6 months of me being here, it was really me just feeling like I've just traveled to a different place in Ghana that I'm not very familiar with. It never really felt like I was so away. Part of that is also because like the weather here is good for me. And I think that the weather is like very similar to Ghana. So I think that helps. So maybe that's it. But for my writing, I think I still feel like I'm in between these two places. And so they are both appearing in the work.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's natural, When I was traveling abroad, I think it was common for me to be like, oh, this place kind of reminds me of my home. This place,
Yes.
There's something here that reminds me of my home. Like there's something about being away from home that it's just you're constantly looking for it in places. So yeah, that's interesting. And I've heard poets talk a lot about liminal spaces, right? Like in between spaces as being really productive spaces for their poetry. Have you found that to be the case for you, that like that feeling of being in between somehow inspires your poetry, or something creative comes from that space?
I don't think it's such a significant thing for me. It has just become a part of who I am. And I say this because, for instance, in Ghana, like I mentioned, I was born in Gunasia. I grew up in Drobo. Right. I did my high school in Sunyani. I did my undergrad in the Volta region of Ghana. And I stayed in Accra for a short while, the capital of Ghana, but not long enough. Then I moved to Cape Coast. So when I was leaving Ghana, I was living in Cape Coast. And all of these places have different elements. And so I have always felt, the places that I've been will come true in my work. And so I think it didn't feel so different that I am in the US. However, of course, there are certain subject matters that I will now confront with that I probably didn't when I was living in Ghana. So yes, that's how I feel about that. So I don't think it necessarily changed so much for me, because it felt like even while I was living in Ghana, I moved so much that I was already doing that.
It's just interesting. It's an interesting thing that I think about a lot, because I have lots of friends who still live in my hometown. I came from a small town, another town where everybody knew everyone. My mom was a kindergarten teacher. My mom was like everybody's kindergarten teacher in my hometown. So like,
it looks like we have the same mom.
Yeah. So I do wonder, like, what would my writing be like if I had stayed in that place? Like, would it be different? Or did leaving somehow change my writing? And now I live back in my home state, but not in my hometown. And still that feels close, but not the same as the place that I grew up in,
Absolutely.
I'm no longer in that like rural area that I grew up. And I do still yearn for the forest, for instance, the land that I grew up on,
Say that again.
Yeah.
No, because like in my my home region, my paternal grandfather had some farms, and there is this one that is on a mountain. And so there's like, forests like everywhere, trees everywhere. And we used to go to farm, and in Ghana is, a common practice, especially if maybe you have a 9 to 5, you could still have like a farm. So my family, because both my parents were teachers, and basic school teachers. So we went to the farm mostly on Saturdays. Right. And so at least every Saturday, I get to be in nature. Like I get to see the trees, and there are so many fruits around as well. So I think that has been something that I do miss a lot. And luckily, I think this summer, during my residency at the Carol Moore Writers Residency in Portland, I was with Kweku Abimbola, and I think that was something that came back to me, because the residency is really surrounded by trees. I think, before I landed, while I was in the plane, I was looking through the window and I was like, you know what? I think I'll love it here.
Yeah.
Because you can tell, you can see the trees even while, in the air. I'm like, yeah, I think I'll love it here. And we get to the residency and, trees surround it. It was just, so beautiful. So yes, I know that feeling of having the forest all around you, seeing birds, it's so beautiful.
I'm curious to hear about the storytelling tradition in Ghana. And like when you were growing up, did you read and write a lot when you were growing up? Did you hear people reading poetry when you were growing up? What got you interested in this?
So, I think we're a group of people that are very metaphorical. I would say that. No, for real. Like, yeah, even the way that we insult, everything is metaphorical. But I think I need to give thanks to this woman who gave me a poetry book. It was actually a children's rhyme book. Um, the funny thing is, I don't know her name. I don't remember her name, but she used to work at the Drabo post office. And I remember going there with my dad one time, and she gave me this children's rhyme book. But aside that, my dad used to teach my older brother and I children's rhymes at home. So we had a blackboard. I mean, I already mentioned that my dad is a teacher. So we had a blackboard at home, and then he would teach us children's rhyme. But I was too young, and so I couldn't pick up so much. But my brother knew a lot of them. And I think the only one that I still really remember is Guzi Guzi Ganda. And it became like my favorite thing, you know. And so, and so, I think I had the writing thing in me at some point, because even in basic school, my essays were good, and my teachers would talk about my essays. So I knew there was something about a writing, but poetry, I think, came along the line. Maybe in junior high school, I started writing rhymes a lot. But also Ghana, like, we have, Kofi Awono, we have Amatedu, Kwesi Brew, like so many amazing poets. And I mean, Prof. Kwame Dawes himself, and some of these people served as some kind of like motivation. I didn't really have access to a lot of their books, I would say. In my house, I think we had more fiction books than poetry books. But I think in senior high school, I continued writing rhymes in senior high school. And then when we graduated from senior high school, a friend that I had met in senior high school, and I think some of our colleagues said that we looked alike, so they called us like twins. And in Ghana, the word for a twin, especially for Akans, the word for a twin is ata. And so we called ourselves like that, until we left senior high school. And then he made a Facebook post after senior high school, which was a poem, because he had been writing. And so he made a poem, like, he wrote a poem talking about his experiences in senior high school. Then when I saw it, I wrote a poem in response to his poem on Facebook in the comments. And then he comes back and he responds, "Oh, Ata, so you can write. Why have you not been sharing your work?" I think that has been the catalyst for everything. And I mean, he lives in the US too now. He did veterinary medicine in Ghana, and he's here in the US now getting his PhD. And that, I think, is the catalyst. So I give thanks to him a lot. Like, that has been the catalyst for everything, because from that time I started, writing and sharing some of my work on Facebook. And then, we took it from there.
Isn't it so interesting how just like one word of encouragement from someone in your life can open something up like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, sometimes when something like that opens a door for you, you find your own way through that door. You walk through that door, and then you find out, okay, what other doors exist here? What other windows are here that I can walk through or I can climb through? So you figure all of those things. So, but I think that was like very important to me. And actually, he actually went to, while he was studying veterinary medicine at the University of Ghana, his name is Sapon, Ajay Sapon Amos. And while he was studying veterinary medicine at the University of Ghana, he won the Kofi Awono Poetry Prize at the University of Ghana, which at that time I think was the biggest poetry prize in Ghana at the time. So he made it possible.
But like you said, you haven't always been writing poetry. You haven't always been pursuing creative writing as an academic. Your bachelor's is in public health and disease control. You have an MA in health education, and you're currently pursuing a PhD with an emphasis in health and culture. So I'm curious to hear what drew you to health education, and what was the focus of your research in public health?
I think I don't want to say this is a joke, but there's this thing that we say that you never meet an African writer who only does writing. I think most of the African poets or writers, especially those who grew up in Africa, they probably have a degree in something else before pursuing. Because if we are going to be honest, pursuing poetry as a career is risky.
Sure.
It is risky. And so sometimes you want to get something that you can actually rely on. And I hate to say this because I do now consider poetry as a career for me. And so I hate to say it and I hate to put it this way, but I think for most of us, like, that's one of the main things. Like, you have to find something else that can get you a job, And I'm not saying that poetry cannot be your job. It can, but let's be real. I don't think we have a creative writing MFA in Ghana. I don't know any. We have literature programs. And often, whoever is studying literature is probably looking at a career in academia. And similar to like creative writing here, most people who go into MFA programs end up being in academia. Of course, there are other people who go to different industries, but majority of the people are probably going to go into academia, right? And so I think after school, after senior high school, I was looking for what to do next. And I knew about disease control because in my home region, there was a school of public health at Kintampo. And so disease control officers were everywhere. So we knew about them. And it felt like a good bridge between, medicine and maybe nursing. I wasn't super interested in nursing and I didn't think I wanted to be a medical doctor. So disease control felt like, oh yeah, this is a good option for me. And so I applied, got into disease control. But even while there, I was still writing. And I remember one of my colleagues at one time asked me, like, maybe this is not the right place for you. Maybe you should be at the University of Ghana because that's where you get the literature programs, And I'm sitting in an epidemiology class and I'm writing poems, So some people felt like, yeah, I was in the wrong place, but I didn't feel that way. I just felt like it was just a part of like what I'm supposed to do.
I mean, I had a similar experience. I mean, growing up in that small town, my family was working class. We didn't have a whole lot of money. And so when I went to university, I wanted to study English. I wanted to study creative writing, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt too risky.
Yes.
So I studied English education and became a high school English teacher.
Yes.
That way I could still take the English classes, the creative writing classes, but I had a career path,
Exactly.
So I think that's common.
It is. And I mean, my undergrad final research was on the role of the creative arts in health promotion. And so I didn't leave it. And currently, for my PhD, I'm actually now engaging more with poetry in health. And so it's still not, something that is so far away from me. I'm using poetry as the method for my dissertation. And so it's still not so far from me. It's still here. I'm doing the same work, just in a different way.
Tell me more about that. I'm curious. How does the art and the writing connect to your work in public health?
Right now, the work I'm going to do, there is this method called poetic inquiry, and which is basically using poetry as the method for your analysis. And so my research is mainly about vaccine hesitancy among like Black populations. And so I'm engaging with the U.S. Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male at Tuskegee. And something happened in 2021 where the descendants of the men who were involved in the study became very strong advocates for COVID-19 vaccination. But of course, they've been advocates for a very long time because they set up an organization called Voices for Our Father's Legacy Foundation, in 2014. And so they've been at this for a while. But in 2021, they were actively advocating for people to, take the vaccines. And I found that to be very interesting. And I wanted to explore the work that they are doing. And I can see that there is narrative repair going on because they're trying to ensure that people know the actual story, because sometimes people think that the men who were involved were given syphilis, whereas they had syphilis but were not given treatment. And so one of the things that they said during those campaigns is that the difference is that now the vaccines are available, you can get them. The men were refused. So why would you put yourself in that same situation? Which has been very interesting for me, and I have been working around that. But I see poetry as something that Black people have used for years. In Africa, we use it. Here in the US, Black people use it. Black people everywhere use poetry for so many reasons. For political reasons, to sing the praise of people we admire or people who are fighting for our rights and all of that. And so I thought that it was a method that was very genuine to the Black experience. Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use it as the method for my research. So that's the work that I'm trying to do now. I'm still working around it, but yeah.
It's super interesting work. And when I looked at your resume, I thought, he's got all this background in public health, but then he's got this MFA dropped right in the middle of it.
Yep.
and I was thinking, what made him want to pursue the MFA? So we're starting to get a picture of why you wanted to pursue the MFA and how it fit into your research. So let's talk about the MFA a little bit. The Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at Chapman University's Wilkinson College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences is located in Orange, California, like you said, which is part of the greater Los Angeles area. Best I can tell from the website, it's a 2-year, partially funded program that allows students to focus on fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, or a combination of genres. So tell us a bit more about why you wanted to pursue an MFA and what made you choose Chapman University.
I think after my undergrad, I really wanted to, go straight. Even while I was in undergrad, I was interested in applying for MFA programs, but of course I needed to finish my program first. And so the year that I started my master's in Ghana, I was actively applying for MFA programs. And I was prepared. And I had support from a lot of people, including some faculty members, from US institutions. And so I had a lot of support. But for some reason, it just felt like maybe this is not the right time. And so I wrote to, some of the people supporting through the process and said, hey, I don't think I want to do this right now. And I remember I had this conversation with one of my friends, and I was like, I am actually pained that I am stopping this, but I don't feel like it's right for me to do it right now. And my friend asked me, but if you know it's right, then why are you feeling this way? And I didn't really have an answer. But she came back to me a couple of maybe weeks later, and it's like, I found a note in my old notebook that said, sometimes it's okay to make a decision, even if it's painful, but it's right. And so it's like, she had the answer from herself, right? So I didn't need to. So I started my master's in Ghana, studying health education at the University of Cape Coast. And when I was almost done, one night I get on Twitter and I see my friend, who is also now a professor, Trifina Yeboah. She's a writer, great writer, and she had posted, apply, apply, apply. She had quoted the MFA director, who had posted that it was about 24 hours or 12 hours to the deadline. And I see this around like 10 p.m. in Ghana. And for some reason, I didn't think about the time zone at the time. Now I'm always concerned about time zone, but I didn't think about the time zone. And so I thought that the 12 a.m. deadline was Ghana 12 a.m. Then I just felt like apply. That was just it. I just felt like apply, and I just started applying. So I did my whole application from around maybe 10:30 p.m. to 12 a.m. in Ghana. I think when I say that, someone might think that I started everything afresh that night. No. As I said, I had planned previously that I wanted to apply for MFA. So I had drafts of various materials that I would use in the application process. I just had to revise them and then, connect them to the Chapman application. But for instance, my friend Trifina studied here at Chapman. And so she had also spoken to me about her experience at Chapman. So I think that was also one of the things that made it like, okay, this is a good decision. So basically, I applied on the deadline, and then after a month, I get a call, and it was my acceptance.
The website for the program says students are encouraged to take classes across genres, including in areas such as graphic novels, young adult writing, and screenwriting. So, how do you think studying across genres benefits your writing?
Personally, I think even some of my earliest writings didn't really fit into any specific genre. So, for instance, my chapbook is really prose poetry. And so I think I've always been on the peripheries of any genre, if that makes sense. And so I think that worked pretty well for me because actually that was one of the comments that I got in the first nonfiction class that I took at Chapman. The professor kept telling me to take off my poetry hat. The poet in me was coming out more in that class. So, and he felt like that wasn't helping the narrative to come out.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sometimes just taking a class in another genre, what it does more than anything else is make you realize that these are kind of artificial boundaries between
Yep,
these different groups, right?
absolutely.
And that actually what you're learning to do is write work that doesn't fit perfectly in some category.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's me. Like, I don't think I've ever wanted to write in any genre, like, that I want to fit neatly in any one of them. I just wanted to do writing that I find beautiful and speaks to somebody. I took classes mainly, I didn't take any fiction classes. I took classes mainly in poetry and then nonfiction. At this point, I think I took probably more nonfiction classes than poetry classes. But my second nonfiction professor, Professor Samantha Dunn, she did a lot for me because in her class, she encouraged the poet in me to come out, so that was like really good for me. And then my poetry class was with the director, Dr. Leahy, and I can't, thank her enough for all the support that she gave me throughout that process. And even now, like we are still in touch. I mean, I'm still at Chapman and she's here. So I still meet her from time to time to talk about, whatever is going on. And she has been very supportive. And as far as I know, she's been very supportive to all the writers in the program. And I think she's one of the people that understood what I was trying to do. For instance, I think she knew that I don't fit neatly into any genre. Like, yes, I write poetry mainly, but I do creative nonfiction. I do lyric essays, and so she knew and she gave me all the support. And she knew that I was also interested in like podcasting. I mean, I started Church of Poetry. And so, for instance, I think I mentioned to you earlier that I took a class in audio drama production from the film school. And that's part of the reason I have like, a microphone here and all of that. Yeah, because I took that class and it was very helpful, especially when it comes to like the audio production itself. But that's not something like someone in an MFA program on a regular would just take. But I took that class. And she supported, I had to send emails here and then. She was in and all of that, helping me figure out, whom to reach out to, with whatever forms that we need to fill before it will count as part of, my degree. So that was like very helpful, and she was very, very supportive.
It's really cool that Chapman allows students not only to take classes across genres, but also encourages them to take classes in different programs within the university. So the fact that you got to take that audio drama class in the film school is really cool. And you mentioned your interest in podcasting and audio forms, and you mentioned that audio series that you started called Church of Poetry. I want to hear more about that. Tell us about Church of Poetry.
So Church of Poetry started while I was in Ghana during the pandemic, because I think I had so many poetry books around me. I was living in Cape Coast at the time, and I wanted to do something with the books. And so one Sunday morning, I sat on my bed and then I just created a Twitter space and called it Church of Poetry. Then I started reading poems from the books and people started joining. So that's where the idea basically, that's how it started. And people just started joining. And so at some point, they're like, okay, maybe I should separate this from my original account. So we created a whole Twitter account for it. So we started hosting like services, Church of Poetry services, every week. And sometimes we hold like multiple services in a week. So I think we had a Wednesday and a Sunday. But of course, like, we got busy, grad school and all of it. I mean, I was still in grad school at the time. I was doing my master's in health education at the University of Cape Coast at the time. But when I left, I think that was one of the things that I missed a lot about leaving. Because if I was going to host Church of Poetry, it means that I would and maintain the same time that I did in Ghana. That would mean that I'll have to be hosting Church of Poetry services at maybe 1 a.m. here, which is difficult.
Yeah.
So I did it a couple of times when I came here. And, we had a few other people who came and then hosted different services. I think one of the other aspects of Church of Poetry that I really liked was that sometimes somebody will come through and it's like, oh, I have not written in over 20 years, but I have this poem I want to share. And I'm like, yeah, go ahead. And so we were not like, gatekeeping. We allowed anybody, whoever you are, like, even if your poem is just one word, go ahead. So, yeah, I think that also really had some kind of an intersection with my work in health, because for some people, it was very therapeutic for them. And I think I listened to one of your previous sessions where the person I think also quoted Morgan Parker saying that poetry is not therapy. But I mean, a lot of writers say that, and I hear them, but I think I don't like how definitive it sounds when they say poetry is not therapy, because it is therapy for some people.
At the very least, it can be therapeutic, right?
Exactly. It can be therapeutic for some people. So I find that when you say it is not therapy, you just closed it off. And I want us to be open to the possibilities, what poetry can do. There is a study that I was reading about how they used poetry to help people develop empathy for incarcerated people. After reading they'll read the poems of incarcerated people, and then they could see physically that some of the people were developing goosebumps. And so poetry can serve so many purposes. And so I'm not really into the whole thing about poetry is not this and poetry is not that. I think there is room for poetry to be so many different things, and we should be open to it.
Yeah, I love that. Another thing you mentioned earlier was how important that professor was to you in your time at Chapman. I want to hear you talk a little bit in general about how important faculty support was to you during your time in the MFA program.
I mean, I can go over and over and over. I mean, of course, when you move to a new country, sometimes it's hard to even like fit in. And I had professors. I mean, I have already mentioned Dr. Leahy. She's no longer the director, but she was a director during my time, and how supportive she was, which was very helpful for me. But she was very, very supportive in the sense that even to this day, she sends me opportunities when she sees them. When I won the Poetry Foundation Award, Poetry Magazine Award, I did not tell my PhD program. She wrote to the PhD program to tell them. And so they got the news from her. So my director in the PhD program wrote to me like, why didn't you tell us? And they announced it, in the program. And it's like, yeah. So she's that kind of a person. And I remember, like I mentioned, Prof. Dan, Samantha Dan, she was also really encouraging me to bring the poet in me into my nonfiction work. And I remember there was this semester that I was really struggling. And so some of my assignments, I was turning them in late. And she emailed to check in. And I think that was like very helpful to me. And it's something that I've carried on even when I'm teaching. I pay attention to my students so much that I can sometimes see that, okay, this person is actually going through something just by looking at them, and so sometimes you can tell that somebody just needs somebody to talk to. And so that support, Prof. Dunn just reaching out was very important to me in that moment. Right. Dr. Levin, who is now the director, was also absolutely supportive. She was my theory professor. And she was also very kind, very thoughtful, took her time to give feedback. When I needed like space to get certain things done, she would, actually help and encourage, So it was very, I had a very good time when it comes to that. Of course, there are other challenges that come with like, all of these, but these things, they reaching out, they speaking to me, and sometimes even just listening to my ideas. That was also very important to me.
Before we wrap up, we have to talk about funding because a lot of our listeners are obviously very interested in the funding at programs when they're considering which programs to apply to. So, according to the website at Chapman, the program offers 3 renewable fellowships per year that cover tuition and provide an $18,000 a year stipend. And then there are also teaching assistantships available that students can apply to. Is that information still correct?
As far as I know, yes. I think 2 students are fully funded, and then 1 student is given tuition. They do not receive a stipend.
And do you have some idea of how many students are able to get teaching assistantships if they want those?
I think in your is the second year or the first year, you take a teaching class, and then that's where you develop the class that you want to teach. And so I'm not so sure how many people.
Yeah, I think I had read on the website something about in your first year, you can take a class in which you kind of develop the skills that you need to teach, and then you have the opportunity to teach in the second year. So I guess for listeners who are thinking about Chapman and are interested in the teaching assistantship, it might be best just to reach out to the program and ask how many of those are available.
Yes.
Well, I have very much enjoyed getting to know you, hearing your poetry, hearing more about Chapman University. Before we go, the last question I ask every guest, what is one way in which the MFA experience was different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
I mean, I've already mentioned the support that I got from faculty members. That was very important to me. It was the peak of things for me. I'm still in touch with professors from the program. And because of that, that will be it for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad you got the support you needed. It sounds like you had a really interesting experience there. And the connections you're making between poetry and your public health work, I find super interesting. So thank you so much for taking some time to hang out with me. It was really nice to get to know you.
Thank you. It's been a nice time chatting with you.